Believe it or not, one of the most successful Soviet fighters of World War II was designed with a flaw so obvious, so utterly terrifying, it's a wonder anyone agreed to fly it. Every mission was a gamble, not just with the Luftwaffe, but sometimes against the aircraft itself. Welcome to Historical Digs, where today we uncover the wild story behind the Yakovlev Yak-9, a fighter that embodied the Soviet war effort, brutally effective, relentlessly produced, and terrifyingly expendable. The Yak-9 starred in a side of the Eastern Front air war that you rarely hear about, a story of desperation, ingenuity, and the razor-thin line between victory and oblivion. The do-it-all dogfighter. By the winter of 1942, the Soviet Union was fighting for its very existence. The initial shock of Operation Barbarossa had given way to a grinding war of attrition, and the Red Air Force was in desperate need of a versatile, frontline fighter that could do more with less. The Yak-1 and Yak-7 had proven themselves capable in combat, but both were designed using pre-war materials and methods that were quickly becoming unsustainable. Aluminum, the lifeblood of modern aircraft, was in such short supply that Soviet planners were facing the unthinkable. Their air force could be grounded not by the Luftwaffe, but by their own empty factories. Enter Alexander Yakovlev's design bureau, which had mastered the art of scarcity engineering. Their later masterpiece, the Yak-3, would be a lightweight marvel of plywood and minimalist design, but it was the Yak-9 that laid the foundation for such innovation. Instead of stripping the plane down, they asked a radical question. What if we could build a universal airframe, a common platform that could be adapted for any mission? The result was the Yak-9, a machine that, on the surface, looked nearly identical to its predecessors, but its genius lay beneath the skin. By incorporating duralium and spars into the wings instead of wood, Yakovlev's team created an airframe that was not only lighter, but vastly stronger and more versatile than the Yak-7. This design choice opened the door to a dizzying array of variants. It could be a long-range escort, a high-altitude interceptor, a photo reconnaissance plane, or a light bomber. The Yak-9 was the Swiss Army knife of the Red Air Force. This versatility was its greatest strength. Factories could mass-produce the basic Yak-9 airframe and then modify it for specific roles without having to retool the entire assembly line. In a command economy struggling with immense logistical pressures, this was a critically effective solution. By the end of the war, over 16,700 Yak-9s had been built, making it the most produced Soviet fighter in history. It was a testament to a design philosophy that prioritized production speed and adaptability over perfection. Before we dive deeper into the Yak-9 story, hit that like button and subscribe to Historical Digs. Your support helps us unearth the untold stories of aviation's most battle-hardened war machines. Pilots transitioning from older variants found the Yak-9 forgiving and astonishingly agile at low altitudes, where the war on the Eastern Front was typically fought. Its Klimov VK-105PF engine, while not a world beater, gave it the agility to outturn heavier German fighters like the Bf-109 and FW-190 at lower altitudes. Ace pilot Ivan Kozhedub, who would end the war as the Allies' top scorer, claimed his first of 62 victories in a Yak-9. But this jack-of-all-trades approach came with a dark side. The very design features that made the Yak-9 so adaptable also introduced a host of lethal compromises. The flying cannon and the flaming seat. Responding to top-level Soviet directives to support anti-tank operations from the air, Yakovlev's team set out to create one of the Yak-9's most fearsome variants. The result was the Yak-9T, where the T stood for Tankovy. Yakovlev's engineers did something that bordered on aviation madness. They mounted a 37mm Nudelman Suranov NS-37 cannon in the nose, firing through the propeller hub. This wasn't a machine gun, it was a piece of light artillery. A single high-explosive shell from the NS-37 could cripple a German bomber, or with precision fire to the turret or engine deck, disable a Panzer IV or a lighter vehicle. The Yak-9T's deep, thunderous cannon fire was unlike anything most ground troops had heard from a fighter, and its appearance often meant that Soviet tanks weren't far behind. But strapping a cannon of that size to a lightweight fighter airframe was a recipe for trouble. The recoil, estimated at over 5 tons, caused a noticeable deceleration and could disrupt aim after each shot. Firing a 3-round burst could throw the plane's aim off completely. Pilots were trained to fire single, carefully aimed shots. The ammunition supply was also pitifully small, with just 30 rounds for the main cannon. Each shot had to count. The weight of the gun and its ammunition also degraded the fighter's performance, making it a sluggish dogfighter. If the Yak-9T was a beast, the Yak-9K was a monster. Introduced in 1944, the K stood for Krupnokaliberny, or large caliber. It carried a 45mm NS-45 cannon, the most powerful cannon ever mounted on a single-engine fighter of the era. The shells were so large they were nicknamed Stalin sledgehammers by some pilots. It was a devastating weapon against bombers and ground targets, but it pushed the airframe to its absolute limit. The recoil was so extreme that it was known to cause oil and coolant leaks, and firing it at low airspeeds could stall the aircraft. However, the real terror for Yak-9 pilots wasn't the recoil of their own weapons, it was the placement of their fuel. To accommodate the large weapons and maintain center of gravity, fuel tanks were reconfigured. Their solution was to place 2 of the main tanks in the wings and 2 more directly in the fuselage, one in front of the cockpit and one directly underneath the pilot's seat. These tanks were not self-sealing until later variants, and there was minimal armor protecting them. A single incendiary round from an enemy fighter piercing the fuselage could turn the cockpit into an inferno. Pilots were essentially sitting on a bomb. The constant fear of fire was a psychological burden every pilot carried with him on every mission. The tide turner of the Eastern Front. Despite its flaws, the Yak-9 was undeniably the right plane at the right time for the Soviet Union. Its sheer numbers and adaptability helped the Red Air Force gain parity and eventually air superiority over the Luftwaffe. By mid-1943, squadrons equipped with the Yak-9s were a common sight all along the vast Eastern Front, from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The fighter played a crucial role in the pivotal battles that turned the tide of the war, including the Battle of Kursk, Operation Bagration, and the final assault on Berlin. One of the Yak-9's most significant contributions was as a long-range escort fighter. The Yak-9D, long-range, and the Yak-9DD, long-distance operations, were fitted with expanded fuel capacity. With the DD model reaching over 1,300 miles in ideal conditions, this allowed them to escort PE-2 and Il-4 bombers on deep penetration raids into German-held territory, missions that had often been highly vulnerable to interception. During Operation Frantic, Yak-9DDs helped escort American B-17s and B-24s during shuttle bombing missions across Eastern Europe, a rare instance of East-West aerial cooperation. American bomber crews were reportedly surprised to be met over Poland by these small, agile fighters that had flown all the way from Soviet territory. In combat, Yak-9 pilots developed tactics that played to the aircraft's strengths. They learned to avoid high-altitude fights where the German fighters held the advantage and instead lure the Luftwaffe down into low-level turning dogfights. Here, the Yak-9's agility and quick acceleration made it a deadly opponent. The famous French volunteer, Normandy Neiman, flew the Yak-9 during their early Eastern Front campaigns with notable success. Marshal Albert, one of the squadron's top scoring aces, flew Yak-9s among other types and praised the aircraft's responsiveness and balance. He described pilots favoring hit-and-run tactics and energy maneuvers, occasionally using the Yak's climb to set up diving attacks when possible. While not a tank filler on the scale of the Il-2, the Yak-9T provided vital precision strike capabilities ahead of advancing Soviet armor. During the massive Soviet offensives of 1944, Yak-9T squadrons flew ahead of the advancing Red Army, creating chaos in the German rear. They targeted not just tanks, but supply trucks, artillery positions, and command posts. Its presence was a clear sign of shifting air superiority and Soviet operational momentum. The Luftwaffe, once the master of the skies, could no longer protect them. Combined with Soviet armor and artillery, the growing dominance of Soviet air power, symbolized by fighters like the Yak-9, helped wear down German resistance and contributed to the collapse of the Eastern Front. The Yak-9, despite its risks, had become a symbol of Soviet resurgence, a weapon that was relentlessly driving the invaders back towards Berlin. It was crude, it was dangerous, but it helped turn the tide. A piston-engined relic in a jet-age war. When the guns fell silent over Europe in May 1945, the Yak-9 story should have ended. It was a piston-engine fighter designed for a specific kind of war, and that war was over. But thousands of them remained in service across the Soviet Union and its satellite states. Just a few years later, this World War II veteran would be called to fight one last desperate battle in a conflict that would brutally expose its obsolescence: the Korean War. When North Korea, equipped and advised by the Soviets, invaded the South in 1950, its air force was largely composed of World War II-era Soviet aircraft, including the Yak-9. In the initial stages of the war, against the unprepared South Korean and early UN forces, the Yak-9s performed adequately. In the hands of skilled pilots, Yak-9s could contend with piston-engined opponents like the P-51, especially in low-altitude engagements and before the arrival of more advanced aircraft. For a brief moment, it seemed the old dogfighter still had some bite. But then, the jets arrived. The introduction of the American F-86 Sabre changed everything. The skies over the Yalu River, which would become known as MiG Alley, became the proving ground for a new generation of aerial warfare. The Yak-9 was hopelessly outclassed. The Sabre was nearly 200 miles per hour faster, could climb to a higher altitude, and was armed with 6 50-caliber machine guns guided by a gyro-stabilized gun sight that dramatically improved aiming at high speeds. A Yak-9 pilot stood virtually no chance in a fight with a Sabre. Outgunned, outsped, and outclimbed, escape was nearly impossible. Some pilots likened the mismatch to turkey shoots, given how easily the Sabres dominated older prop-driven fighters. The Yak's agility at low speeds was irrelevant when a Sabre could dive from altitude, making a firing pass at over 600 miles per hour and then use its superior speed to climb away untouched. Even against the late-model P-51 Mustangs flown by experienced American and Australian pilots, the Yak-9 struggled. While it could outturn a Mustang at low altitude, the P-51 was faster, had a better roll rate, and could take far more punishment. The Yak-9's plywood and fabric construction and its vulnerable fuel tanks made it tragically fragile. The final chapter of the Yak-9 was not written in glory, but in a series of desperate, one-sided engagements over Korea. By 1952, they had been almost completely withdrawn from frontline combat, replaced by the far superior Soviet-built MiG-15 jet fighter. The Yak-9's wartime career was over. It had gone from being a tide-turner to a relic in less than a decade. It was a stark and brutal lesson in the relentless pace of military aviation technology. The story of the Yak-9 is full of contradictions. It was a masterpiece of wartime pragmatism, designed to be fast to build, deadly in a fight, and just survivable enough to count. It was flown to victory by heroes and to their deaths by rookies. It played its role in the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany, only to be sidelined a few years later as jets rendered piston fighters obsolete. So, what do we make of this flawed icon? Was the Yak-9 a triumph of Soviet ingenuity, or a ruthless compromise that prioritized numbers over pilot safety? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoy this look into the brutal realities of the air war and the Yak-9, make sure you check out this video where we dug deep into the Yak-3's story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to join us on the next historical dig. Until then, remember, history is full of hidden gems if you know where to dig.